Okay, should be in here. If you are here, do me a favor and put a little thing in the chat. So one of the things, I've been getting my phone blown up all day about this NAR lawsuit, and I can tell you the headlines are misleading and are leading buyers to think that they are going to be paying less for homes, when in reality, everybody's focused on what the agents get paid and how they get paid versus what the fallout will be for the average little guy buyer. So few of the things that came out today was that come mid-July, that NAR would instruct realtors across the nation to remove co-broke offerings. In other words, the commission for whichever agent brings the buyer, they would remove those from the MLS entirely. At first it was, no, just make it public so buyers know what the agents are being offered, if they're being offered anything. Then, at least with the Arizona Regional MLS, it became it's an option. And it kind of already was an option. I've done it a few times. I've been licensed for 10 years and I've been a full-time realtor the whole time. It has been my sole source of income, not counting my husband, he's got his gig, but you know what I mean? As far as my job, this is my job, and it's probably one of the jobs I've had the longest in life, and it's probably one of the ones I've been the best at. And part of that is my willingness and motivation to really dig deep and figure out exactly how things should be, right? And how to best represent my clients, my stuff. And so what you're seeing on the headlines is that, agents aren't going to make a commission anymore, which is false. What they're saying is that those commissions can no longer be in the MLS. And before I went on my tangent, I have done it before where I've had home sellers, as a listing agent, I've had home sellers say, who were previous agents, say, I don't want to offer a co-broke for this I don't want to offer a co-broke to the buyer's agent because that's just paying somebody to negotiate against me. And that's part of the whole reason of having a buyer's agent, is so that the buyer has their own representation, somebody that's in their corner, somebody that is looking out for their best interest and has a fiduciary responsibility to them, not the seller. And so back in the 80s, before this all came along, in the 80s, it was like 6%, and it was caveat emptor, buyer beware, meaning the listing agent represents the seller and the seller only, and buyers would go straight to the listing agent, and a lot of them got taken advantage of. They overpaid, they entered into deals that maybe weren't as advantageous for them, and they didn't have anybody in their corner because homes would be sold as is. They wouldn't maybe necessarily understand their rights. And so eventually it evolved to have buyer's agents, and those listing agents would give up a little bit of their fee in order to have somebody bring them a buyer, which has been the norm for 30, 40 years now. I've been a licensed agent a little over 10 years now. And in that time, I've had sellers who said, you know what, I don't want to pay a buyer's agent. And so for me, what I did is, out of my side of the commission, I went and I put the minimum amount I could into the MLS. And most of the phone calls I got in those cases were from other agents saying, is that a typo? Because my buyer doesn't have the cash to pay for my fees out of pocket, which is essentially what the NAR lawsuit settlement is saying, is that buyer's agents and listing agents are going to have to negotiate these things into the contract now over who pays what to whom and how much and for what. And so, like, you've heard of seller concessions before to cover with your closing costs. In some cases, over the last 10 years, I've been able to do that once or twice with certain types of loans for my sellers. Now, the way that usually happened was the buyer made an offer that was over list price in the amount that they had agreed to pay their agent, right? And so what you're going to see is you're going to see people say, well, it should be cheaper because the agent commission isn't in there anymore. But what you're going to find is that appraisers have never considered agent compensation as a part of the value of the home. So essentially, you're going to not really see home prices go down, but you will see buyers get pinched, because now if the seller is unwilling to pay that fee and is unwilling to put that in the contract, the buyers will be responsible for paying that fee. And in most cases, you cannot roll that into the price of the loan. Case in point for VA buyers. So for VA buyers, veterans, using their VA benefits, they are not allowed under any circumstances to pay a real estate agent commission, because, and here's the funny thing, let me pull up the exact quote here. And this is straight from, I'm going to read it straight off of the VA loan chapter 8 changes to the it's change number 15 to the VA pamphlet 26-7, which is the revised chapter 8 for borrower fees and charges and the VA funding fee, right? So going through with all that, chapter 8, section 3, fees and charges of the veteran, fees and charges the veteran borrower cannot pay. And for those of you who know me, I'm a certified military relocation professional. A lot of you veterans are my friends. That's who I grew up with. That's who I went to school with. That's who I went to college with. Those were my friends when I lived in Tucson, and when I've continued to like move across the state, like that's just my people. That's who I gravitate towards. Maybe it's because I've got so many people in my family who are veterans. I don't know. But it's just the type of person I get along with. So therefore, I have a lot of veteran friends and family, and just in my general sphere of influence. So this is something I pay attention to quite a bit, because I do a decent number of VA loans. And so, like I said, section 3C is titled brokerage fees. And here's the quote. Fees or commissions charged by a real estate agent or broker in connection with a VA loan may not be charged or paid by the veteran purchaser. While the use of buyer brokers is not precluded, veteran purchasers may not, under any circumstances, be charged a brokerage fee or commission in connection with the services of such individuals, since information on property available for purchase and financing options is widely available to the public from a variety of sources. VA does not believe that preventing the veteran from paying buyer broker fees will harm the veteran. And here's the problem. So now we're taking this out of the MLS, and this settlement stipulates that the buyers need to pay their own agents. Not only is it going to hurt the average little guy, because most of them don't have that kind of cash sitting around to pay their down payment plus their closing fees. Oh, and now they have to pay agent fees. They don't have that much money. They're usually scraping their pennies to get by just to afford the loan. And so even though it's semantics based on which buyer or seller pays, because really, if you're looking at the price of the home, if the buyer's paying $350,000 and the seller is taking that $350,000 and using it to pay both agents, it's really the same as if the seller's paying out of their proceeds and the buyer is rolling the portion into their loan. They're still paying for it. It's just semantics of which side of the column, you know, on the closing settlement statement, that those fees are going to show up. Now, if you're not going to allow buyers, regular buyers, FHA or conventional or whatever, if you're not going to allow them to roll that cost into their loan, just like you would your regular lending closing costs, because make no mistake, mortgage brokers have been rolling the cost of those fees into the loan for a long time, right? So so here you are saying to a bunch of people who are typically cash poor, Americans just are, that's just, you know, how it is. So if you're looking at that and you are a buyer, you're like, okay, I have to come up with more money now to close on my home. So now you're talking, you know, anywhere from 1.5 to 3, sometimes even 4% for a buyer's representation. So now you're going to say, no, Mr. Buyer, I want you to go directly to the listing agent. And I wouldn't say that's telling them to do this, but I think this is going to be the natural fallout, where you'll have a lot of buyers go directly to the listing agent, who's going to take a bunch of offers, and he'll be able to sit down with the seller then and be like, well, I don't know, it removes that layer of protection and identity protection from the seller, because normally a buyer doesn't normally contact the listing agent themselves. And so I think that also, as Ray Ellen mentioned this morning on his podcast, I think that opens the door to potentially some fair housing violations and some discrimination, because you'll essentially have a listing agent who knows exactly who all of these buyers are, their ethnicity, possibly their skin color, their family status, familial status, whatever. And you'll know what exactly they have and what they don't have. Another thing I normally do for my buyers is, when I take my buyers who are getting a loan on something, I will have my preferred lender draft a pre-qualification form that covers the amount of the house, but not necessarily for how much they are qualified for, especially if they're qualified for a lot more, because sometimes that signals to the seller that, hey, they're capable of paying more, so maybe we should try to get them to do that. And so you're removing that layer of protection for somebody advocating for that buyer and going directly to the seller who represents the seller. Now, dual agency is legal in Arizona. It's frowned upon, but it's legal. And in those situations, that agent then has their hands kind of tied behind their back on what they can and cannot say to sellers. But there's also something called a non-represented buyer agreement. And essentially that's telling the buyer that I don't represent you, and anything you tell me can and will be held against you. And trust me, in these situations, for the price point that is going to be affected by this, those people are the most vulnerable, because they're usually the lower price points. $1 million cash buyer, that $18,000, you know, say like 2% or whatever, 1.5 even, that $15,000, $20,000, or maybe even $30,000 at, you know, at 3%, that buyer, that buyer isn't going to be swayed by $15,000 or $20,000. That's a buyer that's looking in $50,000 to $100,000, $200,000 differences to really care. And not to mention, that's also a buyer that can probably afford it. The people that are going to be negatively impacted by this are the people who are cash poor, meaning the people who don't have a lot of money, the people who have lower income, and first-time home buyers, stuff like that. But like I said, most importantly, our veterans now will not be allowed to pay their own agents, even if they have the cash to do so, based on these requirements through the VA loan program. So And then even if they did have the money, say they were a higher ranking officer and they've got a pretty good retirement and they do have that money to pay their own agent, they're not even allowed to. So then they're being denied their benefits that, okay, maybe financially they can handle it, but they're being denied the ability to use their VA loan that they put their lives on the line for, that they sacrificed for. And so to me, regardless of the financial status of the veteran, they earned that benefit. They did a lot of things that most of us wouldn't to earn that benefit. So when you look at it that way, it makes you wonder, why is there so much harping trying to tell the public that real estate agents aren't going to make a commission anymore, when really this is gutting the representation that the average buyer is going to get, but then also is going to screw over people like our veterans who are not allowed to pay for their own real estate agent. And not to mention, like, for me, I've always used a buyer broker agreement. So the requirement that agents are going to be required to have a buyer broker agreement, I've used that for 10 years. I am not at all worried about negotiating my pay with my buyers. If you bought a home with me, that's the first thing we do before we even go look at homes. We sign a buyer agency to tell the potential seller that I represent you and that I'm going to show you homes that are listed by both other agents and by me. So not only are we going to disclose that to the seller, but then we do what's called a buyer broker employment agreement, and that determines what I'm going to work for, what my minimums are, and we do that. And then that way, as we look at homes, if I see one that does not match what you've agreed to pay me, if there's going to be a difference, I can tell you in advance, hey, this seller's only offering X amount. If you close on this, you'll probably end up owing me out of pocket a certain amount. And so a lot of times my buyers have said, well, that's only a $500 difference. I'm okay with that. But there's been other times where my buyers are like, that's a few grand, and they're offering a really low commission that I can't afford to come out of pocket for more than what I already am just to get the loan. So this is kind of one of those things. I really wish that NAR, yes, I'm talking to you, NAR, I really wish that NAR would have pointed out more in the previous lawsuits based on commission that it would be fine if we structure commission this way to where the buyers pay their agents and the sellers pay theirs. But you have to change lending guidelines, because like I said, I've only been able to do one deal in 10 years where the concessions from the seller actually paid the buyer's agent. And you have to be kind of tricky about it regardless of the type of loan as well. But then when we're talking about VA loans, that if that buyer had been a VA loan, we wouldn't have been able to do it anyway. And so that's just something that I want everybody to be aware of, maybe contact your elected officials about, especially your congressman, and, call your Congress critter, call your Senate representatives, and get on the horn and be like, WTF, this is not okay. What's not okay is creating a structure that is going to hurt the little guy, especially, and this is another thing, one of the lawsuits and the recommendations from the Department of Justice said that agents should charge by the hour, like lawyers do. And I'm sorry, but if I really tracked my hours, I don't know of a single buyer that could afford me. Right now I have a new build under contract. It is going to take a year to build and probably 3 different inspections minimum. And, on top of just checking the email every week, making sure everything's on track, if they had to pay me every week, a couple $100 just to keep on top of the email, to drive around, to sit with them in the design center and help, run interference from the design center person whose sole job is to upsell them. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. There's no way that those buyers would have still been within their budget come the end of the year when this home finally gets completed. There's no way they'd still be within their budget because I would have been working for a year billing hourly. And that's just, it screams of one industry being very upset that another industry is perturbed that they are allowed to write their own contracts. And the funny thing is, I've had buyers and clients who have bought homes or live in other states that are attorney states, and literally the agents are just write up like a simple offer, and they don't even write a contract. They just like send an email that says, this is the price, this is the concessions we're looking at, this is the closing date. And then they send it over to a lawyer who then will bill several $1,000s just to like shuffle paperwork that the agents have basically already figured out and gotten everybody to agree to. And so it's really kind of, and I've had those buyers and those clients come back to me and say, I paid that guy $7,000. I have no idea what he did because I didn't talk to him once. So, I mean, when you're telling an entire industry to start charging as if they are a different industry, and that industry has long been very critical of this industry, it just smacks of the big guy wanting to keep the little guy down. But then also, and some of my agent and broker friends have kind of questioned about maybe there are some more nefarious things at play where it's really just a bunch of big actors who would like to potentially keep little guys from buying a home. There's been a lot of talk about institutional investors, and quite frankly, I don't see 60% of Americans who own a home selling to an institutional investor. I always get institutional investors on all of my listings, but to be honest, very rarely do my sellers pick those offers. They're not usually the best offers, and they're usually very, very skewed towards that buyer's favor. Not to say that our current buyer-centric purchase contract isn't, but usually there's some terms in there that are even more screwy than normal. So when you're thinking about it, with that said, it's just kind of, it makes you think, like, who's behind this? Why are they behind this? I have a feeling that some lawyers found a way that they could push this through as a class action and make a killing doing it. But at the same time, I don't see anybody talking about relaxing the lending guidelines or changing lending guidelines and the federal regulations to allow buyers to roll that cost into the purchase of their home and to be able to pay their own agents at all. Like I said, if you're a VA buyer. So with that said, I'm very disappointed in both the federal government and NAR for not having the wherewithal to get ahead of that and to protect the consumer. It seems like right now they're just have axes to grind and are mad that some people make more than others or make money at all in an industry that they feel that they should be entitled to control. And I feel like the only thing coming out of this is the little guys getting screwed over. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, and what you think might happen. So, all right, have a good one, guys. I'll try to cover this a little better in a future video. Thanks.